basically. Nothing Tara, the practice Tara, but has to be seen in the bigger picture, in the broader context. So we're going to do this as usual. We're going to listen to these teachings, think about the meaning, to take some tools from it, because it's advice, you see. Advice is practical. And even if there's only 1% of the advice, then you take that, okay? You can be a 1% Buddhist, not a problem. And the advice is for what? To help develop the two wings of the bird. Wisdom, which is the work we do that lessens our own neuroses and grows our clarity and contentment. And two, so that we can then benefit others, okay? That's the plan. So I'm going to say a little prayer that expresses that. Sangye chodang soke chognam la jantu baru dagni kyabsu chi dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki droda penche sangye drupasho sangye chodang soke chognam la jantu baru dagni kyabsu chi dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki droda penche sangye drupasho Sangye chadam soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyabsu chi dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog. All right. Okay. So this packaging of the teachings, as we know, if you're reading, especially Gelugpa books, you're going to read the word lamrim, gradual path. But I like to refer to it as a course, because that's what a gradual path is. We don't say, "Oh, I'm doing a gradual path in mathematics." You say you're doing a course in mathematics, and we know a course. You start early stuff, go to the middle, go to the advanced, and you graduate. Well, that's exactly this packaging of the Buddhist teachings. First put together by Atisha, this Indian scholar yogi saint who went to Tibet in the 11th century or something. Well, I mean, there's a particular packaging. I mean, it's done in all the traditions, but this is the one that in the 14th century, our Tsongkhapa used that as the basis of his lamrim literature. So what it is, as I've mentioned, is a presentation of the Buddhist teachings from the vast body of knowledge studied in the great monastic university system that goes right back to Nalanda Monastery. As His Holiness always says, we are the Nalanda tradition, back 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th centuries in India, an amazing place of learning of all the levels of Buddhism. All the greatest scholars and yogis whose teachings are the basis of all the teachings we hear now from them. Atisha, one of them, he took the points from that vast body of knowledge and presented the essence of that vast body of knowledge in an orderly way, an experiential way. It's not evident when we first read it. When I first heard the teachings from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I didn't know what he's talking about. It was like 14th century, literally. They still talk the same way, 10th century, 8th century, which is a good thing because it hasn't become corrupted. But it's extremely hard to hear what they're saying, what they're meaning. So all these first stages of practice are where the essence of the first level, as I've always often said, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche, respecting the lineage, would say, is the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. And I colloquially say junior school, because we get that, or grade school, I think Americans call it, don't you? Yes. Grade school, that's what you mean by junior school. Now, what's grade school then? Elementary meaning? How old are you?
Like kindergarten.
Oh, how old? What's the next level called?
Junior high and then high school.
Oh, okay. So well, I'd say all the lot is first lot is junior, then high, then university, then postgraduate. Okay. We're communicating. That makes sense. I mean, it's broadness, but it's good enough. It works for the mind, So the very first level, the essence of it is abiding by the laws of karma. What's that mean? Having good ethics. Why? Because the Buddha says, and this is the basis of his entire philosophy, as we've been discussing, why is because everything we think and do and say is the process called, quote unquote, creating karma, that is the process that produces the person we become. We are our own creators, is the best way to put it, as ridiculous as it sounds. I mean, if you're a materialist, mommy and daddy made you. And if you're a Christian, God made you. Neither of these for the Buddha. Mommy and daddy give you your body, no props. Your mind is yours. and we produce the person we become. And he says he's found that we can turn ourselves into a Buddha. In this Lambrium, you graduate as a Buddha. What's Buddha? A person who's rid the mind of all the rubbish and developed to perfection all the goodness. Sounds pretty simple. This is the basis of the Buddhist approach to life. So the very first level is you ground yourself in controlling your body and speech. Abiding by the laws of karma at first is about controlling your body and speech. Why should you? Because those actions of harming and killing and stealing and lying, using your body and speech driven by delusions, is what sows seeds in your mind that produces your future suffering. So the very first level of practice is Buddha saying, you know, his diagnosis of why you have suffering is because you caused it from the past. So you don't want future suffering, honey? Don't cause it. You don't want diabetes? Don't eat sugar. You don't want cancer? Don't smoke. You don't want to be killed, lied to, stolen from, bad mouth, not to mention a crummy old rebirth? Then don't cause it, babe. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. This is the point of good ethics. We are the beneficiary. It's hard to hear this. We hear good ethics as being a nice person because someone said so. You might get rewarded, you know, not like that. Practical approach. Then you continue this all the way to enlightenment. Then you add to this next level, next component, next scope, practices and teaching suitable to the disciple of the middle capability, high school. Now you get to the root of the problem, the mind, delusion, the deluded neuroses in the mind, the voices of ego. Buddha has found, and this is what's amazing, that this stuff is adventitious, they say. It's not intrinsic. It's not at the core of our being. So now we really begin to be Buddhists. Good ethics is common to the world. They mightn't call it karma, but, you know, nice materialists, nice communists, nice Christians, they're all got good ethics. That's not unique. But this is where you get to the unique approach of being a Buddhist. You become your own therapist, as Lama Yeshe puts it. You dig deep, drill down, unpack and unravel the contents of your own mind. Not your brain. You can also be a neuroscientist, no problem. We're not discussing that. So if you graduated here, this is high school. If that's the wisdom wing, this is the wisdom wing. If you graduated there, you'd achieve your own you'd achieve your own nirvana. You'd realize emptiness, get the hell out of this, not coming back. Goodbye. I'm out of here. You don't come back. But if you go to the next level, the compassion wing, the bodhicitta component, the compassion component, university, if you like, this is where you now, even if you don't need to come back, even if you finish the job for yourself, accomplish the wisdom wing, you want to in order to be of benefit to others. So you add this amazing stages in which we discuss of compassion, love, bodhicitta, outrageous attitude of the brave bodhisattvas to never give up wanting to benefit others out of incredible compassion. Then you, on the final stages of the Mahayana component, the Mahayana path, there's postgraduate, the Vajrayana, Tantrayana, Mantrayana. There are various terms. This is the most sophisticated, the most advanced, the most powerful level of Buddhist teachings. And these are only extant intact in Tibet. All of these teachings come from India in an unbroken chain right back to Buddha. And then in the 4th century went to China and then Japan, maybe Japan first, no, China first, Japan, all the parts of Asia, but not all of the Buddhist teachings, you know, went to all the rest of the Asia. Only Tibet are all the stages of practice, including the Vajrayana, only in Tibet. And they're still extant now, you know, existing by the skin of its teeth, because now in the degenerate Western world, it's going down fast. There's still the teachings of the living beings, as Holiness Dalai Lama, these holy beings are still around, embodying these teachings, passing them on, you know. How fortunate we are. There's different ways of talking about the Vajrayana, therefore about the Tara practice. So one way of talking is in terms of the type of way a Buddha manifests to benefit sentient beings. So we discussed this when we talked about refuge, and I'll say it again. The word Buddha actually refers to the mind only, the omniscient mind, the developed mind, the fully enlightened mind. By that point, you don't need a bag of bones. You don't need bodies. Of course, this is so abstract for us because if we take it from the materialist point of view, you know, we define ourselves by our body in the materialist philosophical view. But the body, a body, whether it's an ant's body, dog's body, human body, is a gross thing and as a result of some level of delusion or other. Eventually, when you've gone beyond samsara, gone beyond, you realize emptiness, perfected emptiness, perfected your realization of emptiness, and it, controlled your body and speech, controlled your mind, unpacked and unraveled, got renunciation, got rid of attachment and the rest, and then realized emptiness, got rid of the fundamental misconception of an I, and then perfected that. You've achieved your own nirvana, your own liberation. By that point, that's when you finished needing to come back and have a body. You don't need it anymore. Your mind's in this subtle state. You don't need a gross body. Now, if you're on the compassion wing, at some point it's the same. You don't need, but you choose to come back, have bodies to benefit sentient beings. When you become a Buddha, there are two kinds of bodies you can manifest in to benefit sentient beings. So the first one is indicated by the Buddha, this one here. This Buddha here, Shakyamuni Buddha, the person, the Indian, the sadhu who came through that amazing system of all the Hindu traditions. I don't know all the names of those different philosophical views living at that time. But as I said, they've been around well before the Buddha. And as His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation to the nature of self. Buddha came up in that tradition and then diverged in his own direction, specifically in relation to his own direct experiential findings about the nature of self. That's where the teachings about emptiness come in. That's unique to the Buddha. So he achieved enlightenment. He became a Buddha in that life, he said. So then that body is the manifest. That's the body that he manifested. That's the body that if you were in India at that time, you would have seen him. But you wouldn't have recognized, oh, there's a Buddha. You wouldn't know because you're not clairvoyant. Buddhas don't need bodies, but he had a body. So that was he would look like all the other sadhus. India was crawling with sadhus, these dudes in their yellow robes. They didn't let the girls in, did they? Anyway, never mind about that one. Probably some girls pretended to be boys. I always think that. Never mind. I'm just cracking jokes here. Don't worry about it. I better be careful. I got carried away sometimes with my jokes. Okay. Oops. So the body of a fully enlightened Buddha in the form that looks like you and me is called the emanation body. They call it, it's a Sanskrit word, Nirmanakaya. Don't want to get too fancy here. And that's what we would recognize because he looks like us. He looked just like us, a human. But there's another body, another form the Buddha manifests in, which is really coming from the Vajrayana. It's the Mahayana component, the Bodhisattva path, but it's the Vajrayana component. And that's all these other ones, the green ladies and yellow men and many legs and arms and God knows what. All these are forms of the Buddha from the Vajrayana. So basically, you have a little kind of family tree here. Like you got the word Buddha. That's the actual meaning of the actual Buddha, which is the enlightened mind. And under that, you've got the Nirmanakaya, the emanation body, which is the sutra teachings, this one. And then you've got the other one. So in our tradition, and sometimes they call it Samantabhadra in different traditions. Sometimes in ours, we call him Vajradhara. And he's in this type of form I'm going to be describing. So he's like the tantric aspect of this Buddha. So there's Shakyamuni Buddha and then Vajradhara. So this tantric aspect, the Bodhisattva style, because it's from the Vajrayana, which is quite a different psychologically and philosophically, which I'm going to describe roughly. It's kind of like in this kind of delicious looking, not like a monk. So this image here, look at the meaning of it. It's not just some cute guy, sitting there quietly. It's actually got meaning. It's a manifestation of this first of the Sutrayana path, the complete subduing of the body, the speech, and the mind. It's like a visual language. He represents that. By looking at that, he's showing you the manifestation, showing you in control, body, speech, and mind. So the emphasis in the Sutrayana practice is to harness the berserk energy, to control the body, control the speech, control the mind, and have effortless control over it, and then develop infinite love and compassion and wisdom. So you're this marvelous, compassionate, effortlessly wise, effortlessly beneficial person, So on that path, psychologically, the main problem is attachment. So the job is to give up attachment. The Four Noble Truths, Buddha effectively says the main cause of all suffering is the Four Noble Truths, is attachment in this life of ours, in these realms of existence in which we live. Actually, the root delusion is the one that clings to the self, but effectively attachment is the main cause of suffering. As Lama Yeshe says, I can tell you about attachment for one whole year. We will never begin to understand it until we start going deeply into our own mind. We start at the simplest level. We control first the servants of attachment, which is the body and the speech. It's pretty obvious, you know. You don't kill, you don't steal, you don't jump on the wrong partner, you don't lie, you don't use your body and speech to harm others. And those actions are driven by attachment. And then when attachment doesn't get what it wants, anger. Killing is not out of love and compassion, believe me. Stealing is not because you're generous. Lying is not because you're thinking of others. These are naturally I-based, neurotic, deluded states of mind that cause us to suffer and then cause us to harm others. So we're harnessing that. So attachment effectively is the root of the problem. We start to get deeply into that in the middle scope, high school. Unpack and unravel it, and then learn to get rid of it. But don't hold your breath. It's very primordially deep. So attachment's the problem. So from the point of view, you could argue like this. And then, so the very first level, given that attachment is the problem, you control your body and your speech. So you leave the chocolate cake on the plate. Use the chocolate cake as an example of an object of attachment. When you've got lots of attachment, we know whether it's alcohol, girls, handbags, video games, the obvious gross level, you know, attachment is completely freaking out. There's emotional hunger and you've got to get the object. We know that. So when we give up alcohol, you leave your hand in your lap. You try to give up attachment to cake, you leave your hand in the lap. You begin to harness this crazy energy. So the very first level of practice is no wriggle room. You leave the cake on the plate. Next level, when you've got some level of harnessing your body and speech, now you start to look into the mind and get into to understand attachment. You could argue you've got a bit more control by now. You're not fooled by attachment. And maybe you can kind of taste the cake without completely going berserk, just using it as an analogy. By the time you get to the compassion wing, you might not even yet have realized emptiness, but your compassion is so tremendous. It overrides your attachment. And you could even enjoy the cake without going berserk because you do it solely for the sake of others. Your compassion is so tremendous. You could even argue attachment's not even a problem for you now. And by the time you realize emptiness, then you've finished. But here, if you get to the Vajrayana level, postgraduate, you now are so together. You control your body, you control your speech, you control your mind, you control the attachment, you've got compassion. Now, it has been found in the more sophisticated level, psychologically, in Vajrayana, the way we are constructed, and this came from these genius yogis before the Buddha, the very way we're constructed and the way attachment works. So the person who's got control over their body, speech, and mind, who's got control over attachment, can actually utilize the joy that comes from attachment by having contact with an object of attachment as a path to enlightenment. It's a bit like the analogy is the lamas, they say it's like, you know, alchemists can turn ordinary metal into gold. Well, great healers would be able to use poison as medicine. This is the analogy they use. That's how they talk. And so as Lama says, Vajrayana is very technical. So the only person qualified really to utilize the natural joy in the mind that's triggered by contact with an attachment object, and then when that's combined with shamatha, the single point of concentration, that is the person who's gone beyond it. And that person can get their mind to the subtlest level, and that subtle level of mind, energized by the combination of attachment, bliss and concentration, enables the person to get realizations very quickly. So it's a very technical. This is one way of describing about Tantra, okay? Whatever that means to you. So now, in that path, there are now different ways the Buddha manifests for the sake of sentient beings. And it's the Bodhisattva style, which is not the monk style. It's more to do with the energy. So where you want to, now you want to energize the senses. We want to enhance this joy that's energized by the senses, by the sensory objects. So all these Buddhas, so there's Vajradhara in this little map, the Buddha mind, then there's the one form of the Buddha, this one, the one we can see, and the other one, the Vajradhara. And now when I first went to Kopan Monastery, and I went, because I say it like this, I've always been on the propaganda side all my life. My father was a journalist, and we learned, we had a printing company, and we learned graphics and editing and just all that kind of thing. And then when I was a hippie, I did all the hippie kind of literature. Then I was a radical lefty, I did the radical lefty literature. And then I became in the black politics, I became we did all our groups and things, I did all that literature. Then I was a feminist, I was on the feminist literature. Then I became a Buddhist. The moment I walked into Kopan Monastery, I went straight to the publishing room and started typing and editing and doing, on Roneo machines, those old days we had Roneo machines. And I kept coming up with this person called Vajradhara, and I wondered who he was. And the Tibetan name for him is Dorji Chung. And I felt very attracted. And I said to Lama Yeshe, who's Dorji Chung, Lama? And Lama, being so marvelous, doesn't give this intellectual answer, the tantric aspect of Shakyamuni, blah, blah. He said, oh, he's the biggest Buddha, dear. And I felt so proud I liked the biggest Buddha, I'll never forget. The biggest Buddha, dear, he said. So it's the tantric aspect of Shakyamuni. And he's blue in this bodhisattva style, like these pictures, looking gorgeous, And then under him are the 5 Buddha families. There's a group called the 5. And each of the 5 Buddha families, each of these Buddhas, you'd hear these names, are a manifestation of purified delusions. So it's a more advanced level of working with delusion. So for example, Amitabha is a purified aspect of attachment. So the very first level, you just leave the cake on the plate because your attachment's too berserk. Next level, you begin maybe to taste a little bit because now you're working with attachment. Next level, you'll happily eat the cake because compassion is so tremendous. Now on the tantric path, the tantra path, you're so together, so marvelous, probably even realize emptiness by now. You can actually consciously eat the cake to energize, the joy, because you're able to transform the delusions onto the path, in the path. It's the most advanced psychologically. So Amitabha, for example, the first of the 5 Buddha, one of the 5 Buddha families, manifestation of purified attachment. Akshobhya, manifestation of purified anger. Vajrayana, manifestation of purified ignorance, like that. And under those 5 Buddha families, all the thousands of other Buddhas. So it's like it's psychology. It's all about the mind. Of course, it's not how we think about the mind. Seeing some green lady with a nice, pretty breasts and 4 hands or something looks most peculiar to us. What's that psychology? We've got to understand it. It's another language. So also the other way of talking about these practices, they're very powerful methods psychologically for enabling us to quickly become ourselves as a Buddha. So when you do a practice, for example, now we're going to talk about Tara, okay? So first of all, there's 4 levels of teachings, in 4 levels of these tantric practices. And in the highest level, there's practice you wouldn't do them unless you'd received what they call an empowerment. But the first level, so-called Kriya Tantra or Action Tantra, many of the practices that are very popular in Tibet, like Chenrezig, the Buddha of Compassion, Tara, Manjushri, these are, one is able to do those practices without having received an empowerment. So what's the psychology of these practices then? Well, basically what you're doing is Buddha, one way of talking about these popular Buddhas, other word they use in Tantra is deity. It's equivalent to the word Buddha. And there's a small d, it's not like equivalent to God the creator, not like that. So one way of talking is that a Buddha has 3 essential qualities. Compassion, which is the wish to benefit others, the wisdom to know how, and the power or the ability to do so. This is interesting. I always tell this story as well. A few years ago in Melbourne, my city in Australia, I was asked to give a talk at the Catholic University. Because I was a Catholic, you see. So I always mention this. And I got there that morning, I had a 20-minute slot, and I didn't know what to talk about. I didn't know. And I looked up the dictionary, the definition of God, 3 essential qualities. infinite wisdom. They use, every time we talk, I think I always say this, every time we talk, we have especially psychology and these things, we give it a Latin name or a Greek name. I don't know why, it's just ridiculous. So we call it omniscience, all knowing, Of course, no one posits all knowing omniscience in psychology. That would be ridiculous. But we know that if you're Catholic, God is all knowing. But there's only one of them. Well, Buddhism says we can all achieve that. So it's one of the first qualities also in Buddhism. Second quality of God is infinite wisdom. Oh, that's wisdom, sorry, infinite compassion. So first of all, Buddha says you can have omniscience. Second, you can have infinite compassion. I thought, well, that's interesting. And the third one is called power. It's exactly the same. The difference is Buddha says everybody can accomplish it, which of course is a shocking thing to say to a Christian, that you can become God. You can't talk that way because there's no creator in Buddha. So anyway, that was interesting. So I gave the talk and I said the definition, the discussion, the title of my talk was the similarities and differences between God and Buddha. I'm not sure if they liked it, but that was what my talk was. Anyway, so there are three essential qualities. So compassion is represented by Chen Rezik, compassionate-eyed one, Lama Zopa calls him. Then you've got wisdom, and that's often depicted by Manjushri, Manju, gentle voice, Jamyang in Tibetan. And he's orange and he's holding a sword aloft with a tip of fire cutting through ignorance. The third quality, power, they call it, or ability or action energy, that's often depicted by Tara, this female one. So, okay, so then in this case, she represents kind of like action, cutting through the obstacles, quick action. That's often depicted as female. Action, get things done, cut through the obstacles, make things happen, success, courage, confidence. She represents that quality. Now think about this. We all need that. So these practices are these marvelous psychological practices where you visualize, you imagine there's Tara in the sky. And we'll finish today with we'll do a little one. And basically they call these practices in Tantra bringing the future result into the present. So in other words, Buddha is your best positive psychologist. This is positive psychology. Thinking positive, optimistically. All these affirmations we do, we imagine the future and we bring it into that's exactly what these practices are. So basically you're visualizing this idealized form of Buddha in the aspect of Tara, or the aspect of wisdom, or the aspect of compassion. You can choose. It's like a little kind of, it's like you go, I always think of when I go to Whole Foods and look in the homeopathic section, it's very practical. They have A to Z names for the diseases and A to Z names for the medicines. So you go, zoop, oh, there's arthritis, boom, okay, there it is, arnica. Oh, great, So you get your medicines. There's a medicine for each one. Well, these practices are like medicines for each of the problems. Some of the practices are to actively help you get compassion. Other practices are active to help you purify attachment. They're very skillful. So Vajrayana, for example, one of the more advanced practices. If John is here, he asked me about it and I said I'd talk. Are you there, John? No, he's not there.
I am. I am. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're listening?
I am listening.
You're taking it in?
Very much.
Good, honey. Okay. So Vajrayana, she's a more advanced practice. You wouldn't do her without empowerment. And she's this gorgeous, naked, red lady. I mean, I remember seeing one time in one Catholic church, a statue of Our Lady showing her breasts. I think the poor Catholics were very shocked. These nuns were very forward. They had Our Lady showing her breasts, feeding Jesus. I thought it was lovely, Anyway, these ones are outrageous. They'd shock most people. The Vajrayana is naked. Starkers, as we'd say in Australia, for stark naked. Australians have this ridiculous infantile language that we've created. It's so ridiculous. You don't wear lipstick, you wear lippy. I swear to you, you wear lippy. No, I won't start. Australians are ridiculous. Anyway, Vajrayana, she's this manifestation of purified desire, purified attachment. She's completely divine. And by doing these practices, it enables us, and this is why they're so sophisticated, these practices. Visualizing this energy helps transform your own attachment and transform it into the enlightened mind, you know. Or this is where it's more sophisticated, because in the very beginning, when there's no wriggle room, you just don't kill, you don't steal, you don't lie. And then even at the second level of practice, you don't have attachment, you don't have anger, because it's just, you've got to be strong and clear first. But as you get bodhicitta, and as you realize emptiness, you're much more wise, much more amazing, much more powerful. Because you realize emptiness, these ideas make sense. Without emptiness, these are insane ideas. They're mad, they're crazy. You know? Utilize anger? What are you talking about? That makes no sense to us. So it's necessarily more advanced, you know, more sophisticated psychology. Also, as we might hear, sometimes we see the word yidam. It's a term used in Tibetan referring to the practice, the Buddha, that you particularly connect with. And you end up in this life connecting with this one, and that becomes your main practice, you know. So for example, one of our amazing yogis, Geshe Lama Kontrog, who, when he left Tibet in 1959, he went straight up into the mountains and meditated for years, naked, no food, no sleep, 24 hours a day in these amazing caves where Milarepa used to meditate. And as Lama Zopa said, he lived in Vajrayogini's Pure Land. His mind was so advanced, you know, so outrageous. I mean, we don't have equivalent like that in our culture. We do not. But he was a practice. So when he came to Kopan, he'd lived for years in these mountains, 6 foot of snow in the winter. I mean, his body was so weather beaten. He looked like a grumpy old grandfather, you know, but he was Vajrayogini, this blissful red Buddha. But you can't tell. He looked like this grumpy old grandpa, you know. So a male person like him could have one of these female Buddhas as his main deity, where you identify yourself with that deity. You become that Buddha. It's really brilliant psychology. Of course, like anything, you have to learn it, learn the meaning, understand. It's like a language we don't speak. It's like a foreign language to us, this whole approach, you know. So these are the most powerful practices, said to be the most powerful, the quick path to enlightenment. So, you know, all the different delusions there are Buddhas that are manifestation of those purified aspects of those delusions. And there are all the different virtues, the different Buddhas representing the virtues. So one connects with, we need them all, obviously, but you connect with certain ones, you know, you discover your main yidam, and that's the one you become when you practice. And all these Buddhas also have a sound manifestation of their energy. That's their mantra. These Sanskrit syllables. The Tibetans have never translated the syllables, the Sanskrit, because Sanskrit is said to be very powerful sound. Of course, it's all abstract for us to hear that, but we have to learn it, you know. So they keep the mantras in Sanskrit, except they've developed their own pronunciation over the years. So it's sort of like Tibetans have all got a Scottish accent, you know. If you hear Oxford English, then you hear a Scot, you can't understand what they're saying. So Tibetans have got their own way of saying. So when the typical example, you know, you hear the Vajrasattva mantra, Om Vajrasattva Samaya. Well, the Tibetans have turned it over the centuries. It's become Om Benza Sattva. Don't ask me how it got to become that. Anyway, they've got their own pronunciation. So these mantras, each of these Buddhas has their own mantra, which is a sound manifestation of the same quality. So by utilizing these practices, it's a very quick, it's in other words, it's roughly speaking, in all the sadhanas, as they call them, these practices put together, they're constructed in such a way. But for example, keeping it very simple, and we'll do Tara before we finish, it's a very simple example of it. You visualize the Buddha out there, and you imagine light coming and purifying, you go through this process. And then at some point, you'd bring it above your head, and then you'd imagine that energy dissolving into you, and then you visualize, and this is when you've taken the empowerment, you become that yourself. It's a very practical way of more and more imagining, becoming, purifying, and then imagining you become Tara. So when you're taking the empowerments, you've kind of received the empowerment, the permission to actually visualize yourself. And then there's a whole process. It's all very, it's technical, as Lama Yeshe said, highly technical. And all the practices are to enable us to become the Buddha ourselves as quickly as possible. So now you have to ask me questions. That's about it, really. There's more to I want to say about how you bring this into your daily life. This is where Lama Yeshe was pretty marvelous. You know, I'll describe that afterwards, but I'd like you to ask me some questions. So did you have any questions, John? Was that enough for you?
No, that was wonderful. I guess if you have any more resources where I could find more information about Vajrayogini, any books, any websites, any
I understand.
audio
I think
or
so.
video teachings.
But I would suggest, darling, I would suggest that you don't just look into Vajrayogini. You've got to look into the whole philosophical approach and all the deities, what they all represent, and then you'll understand Vajrayogini in context. It's much better, not just her. Do you understand me? John,
I do.
do you understand?
I do understand.
So you've got to, one book I highly recommend, which is Lama Yeshe, I'm about to talk about, my teacher. He wrote a wonderful book about Tantra in general. And when you understand the general principles, you'll be able to understand what Vajrayogini is. Do you understand the specifics? They're all specifics. So why don't you, first of all, Lama Yeshe's book, Introduction to Tantra. Highly recommend.
Oh, it's a wonderful book.
Published by Wisdom. You know it.
Yeah, it's
You
one of
know
the
it.
best books on Vajrayana. It's one of the best in the world.
Exactly. You're exactly right. Well, I'm such, you must be such an authority. You can say that with such authority, John. Be careful. Petal, are we communicating?
I'm listening.
John, oh, good, I'm happy. The other one of Lama Yeshe's, if you'd like to know, it's all about the completion stage practices, and that's called The Bliss of Inner Fire. All right, darling?
Wonderful. Thank you. So I'm writing it down.
And I beg your pardon?
I'm writing the title down right now. Thank you so much.
Okay, very good. It's both published by Wisdom. And because Lama Yeshe's main yidam was Heruka Chakrasamvara, and Vajrayogini is Chakrasamvara's consort, or one aspect of Vajrayogini. So it'll help you learn about them, their mother Tantra. There's different levels of Tantra. But Lama Yeshe's books, as you already can know, are wonderful. So he's written many commentaries on the different practices. And there is a practice on Vajrayogini that technically is not technically speaking is not available until you've taken the empowerment, you know. But you've not taken the empowerment?
I have.
Oh, you have?
I have.
Okay then. Well, then why don't you write to lamayeshe.com, Nick Rebush at lamayeshe.com, and ask him, tell him you've taken the empowerment in the different tradition, in the Nyingma or Kagyu or something, is it?
In the Kagyu tradition.
Okay, darling, good. And then Lama Yeshe taught this in Australia in 1979, and there's a transcription of that teaching that Lama Yeshe gave on Vajrayogini. It's all the same. When Lama teaches Tantra, he teaches the general principles of Tantra generally, but it's not too technical, but it's a very delicious kind of transcript, a very delicious transcript, okay?
And how do you spell Rebush? Nick Rebush, how do you spell his last name?
Ribush.
Thank you so much. This is wonderful.
And he might tell you, and there are other books around. I know there are. So if you just, I don't know if the Kargyupas, but certainly the Gelugpas have, because it's one of our main practices, that I think they've probably got some good commentaries out there on Vajrayogini. I'm sure you'll find them. But if you do find, if you get my email, you can always check them, run them by me, and I'll tell you if I think they're okay. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, people? No. So did I?
I'll ask.
Where are we? Yes, did I go?
At the end of one of Lama Zopa Rinpoche's practices, the Vajrayana for the 4 minute powers.
Yeah.
And I've been saying it for years, and I would just love to hear if you have anything to add to it. Would be in emptiness, there is no I, creator of negative.
Okay, the 3
no
circles, they call it. The 3
there is no
circles.
negative karma
Okay,
created.
sure. That's not Tantra at all, but we can discuss it. That's not Tantra.
I know.
It's just,
we
but
never
you-
circle back around to the emptiness and the dependent. It's not appropriate to do it tomorrow. That was a question that we started, and then they never,
who's we?
where you started to go into the 12 links and nihilism, and then someone else asked a question. You said, okay, that's another time, and we're
Oh, I didn't talk about emptiness yet, did I? You mean I didn't talk about emptiness yet?
not at all.
I
that's
see.
okay. So
What are we talking about tomorrow? What are we talking about tomorrow? Anger.
anger.
Okay.
If there's time, if not,
We better talk about emptiness. Shush. I can decide what I want. I don't need your permission. I don't need you to forgive me or get me off the hook or tell me it's okay. I promise you. Thank you, though. You're very kind. Because the reality is, okay, in order to be qualified to enter into Tantra, as they say it, you need the 3 principal aspects of the path. This is Tsongkhapa's approach, which essentially is practicing exactly what I talked about already in the Lam Rim. You got to go, in order to get to postgraduate, honey child, you've got to be in university. In order for university, you've got to have high school. And in order for high school, you've got to have junior school. It's sort of obvious. It's a no-brainer, you know. So the three essential prerequisites are what they call renunciation, which is really is the wisdom wing and a combination of junior school and high school. You've got to have recognized and understood clearly suffering and its causes, karma and delusions, and want to give them up. That's renunciation. You've got to be qualified and have a semblance of appreciation for bodhicitta. Without that, it's a joke. And you've got to have a confidence in the understanding of emptiness. And this is what the entire Lam Rim brings you through. Because if you're going to use attachment, if you're going to use a poison, you clearly have to know what it is. And the only person who's qualified to use poison is a person who understands it intimately and knows exactly what it is and can utilize it. It's sort of obvious, you know, which means you have to understand attachment and know what it is and want to give it up. And you have to have bodhicitta, incredible appreciation of bodhicitta. And without emptiness, the whole thing is a load of nonsense, superstitious nonsense, you know. So then we've talked about bodhicitta. Let's talk a bit about emptiness then, which is back into the sutra teachings, but it's applying also to Tantra. Okay. All the teachings of the Lam Rim, right, Tsongkhapa presents, lead to the teachings on emptiness. The most advanced way of Buddha describing why we suffer. So that we learn, especially in high school, in the middle scope, about the mind. We then learn to understand delusions, attachment, all the delusions, attachment, anger, all the other rubbish, and understand how they are a source of pain. But we begin to become familiar with how they are misconceptions. And this is the part that's really abstract for us. To say when you see a person shouting and yelling and they're angry and say, oh, they've got a misconception, that's just too confusing for us. What are you talking about? You know, if I'm shouting at you and you did punch me in the nose, and then someone says, Robina, you're suffering from a misconception. You know, no, he did punch me. You saw him. So we don't even know what it means, a misconception. And this is where it takes time to start to look into these, delve deep into these states of mind and realize that we're totally programmed with these delusions because we practice them for eons. And they're rooted, the emotion of anger, the emotion of attachment, the emotion of jealousy, they're rooted deep down in being misconceptions, conceptual stories, and conceptual elaborations, nonsense. They have no basis in reality. That's the essence of what Buddha's telling us. In fact, he's saying, this is the essence of what Buddha's saying, we suffer because we're living in la la land. We suffer because we are not in touch with reality. Initially, this is very abstract, so that's why we don't hear it immediately. This is Buddha's key point. So the degree to which we're caught, he says, the degree to which we're caught up in attachment, anger, and all the other neuroses is the degree to which, one, we suffer and are miserable, but two, the degree to which we're living in la la land, that we are not in sync with reality. Because these delusions exaggerate the very status of things. Attachment exaggerates the deliciousness of the cake. Anger exaggerates the ugliness of the ex-boyfriend. Pride exaggerates our importance. Low self-esteem exaggerates our lack of importance. They all have that very specific function, which is a conceptual thing, but it's so programmed, we don't notice it as conceptual. We're not in touch with reality. That's why we suffer. And we're up and down like yo-yos, you know. So the key, the root delusion, the root misconception, the most primordial, therefore the hardest to recognize, is called simply ignorance, mahripa, unawareness. Specifically, the root one is a specific unawareness of the actual status of the I and everything else, how they actually exist. So there's the cake on the plate, the chocolate cake. Attachment in the mind, coming from this emotional hunger, you know, feeling I'm lacking something, very emotionally hungry, then that what it does is it exaggerates the deliciousness of the cake. We know this. The cake looks divine, kind of like vibrating deliciousness, begging me to eat it. We know that. That's attachment's lie, over exaggerating its delicious. Now, ignorance's lie, which underpins the attachment and simultaneous with it, over exaggerates the very ontological status itself of the delicious cake, as if the delicious cake is out there on the plate having nothing to do with me. It's intrinsic, inherent, in and of itself, real, truly existent, truly established, natural. There are like 20 synonyms. And this is so primordial, so profound, we're as blind as bats. We don't see it. So what Buddha's telling us is we have to recognize we have to identify that fantasy in the mind and see how it's lying to us. And then we have to identify how that doesn't exist there. That's called the emptiness of that absence of it. The absence of that fantasy that ignorance projects onto the cake is what we have to discover. So Tsongkhapa loves to talk about this in the framework of the two truths. He's got this wonderful poetic text admiring the Buddha for his marvelous teachings on dependent arising. So the two truths: conventional reality, ultimate reality. Everything that exists, Buddha says, cakes, toilets, peanuts, Buddhas, hell beings, eyelashes, computers, whatever you establish as existing, has these two modes of existing. One, it has a conventional character, and it has this ultimate. And they're both there on the same object. And one way of understanding emptiness, the shorthand for this absence of that intrinsic nature that we think is there, but which it isn't, is to see it in the framework of the conventional truth, the two truths. So Buddha says everything that exists, we see them mistakenly like this. And this is the root cause of all suffering. So we've got to go gradually. First control the crazy servants of the delusions, and then start to control the grosser delusions like attachment and anger, and then get bodhicitta, and then finally in the six perfections, we start to get shamatha, and then we get insight into this subtlest truth. So gradual. So basically the words are, again, that this ignorance in the mind causes us to believe totally that everything in the universe has its intrinsic nature. But it's so primordially automatic to every living being. Dogs, animals, ants, humans all have it. It's primordial and ancient and the most primordial habit. So primordial that we even if we hear it, what are you talking about? We are puzzled. We're as blind as bats. So a good way to discuss it then in terms of conventional reality. So let's take the phenomenon. There are millions of phenomena or things that exist in the Buddhist approach, the world. And one of those is called an I, a person, a self. These words are synonymous. A dog is a person, a human is a person, an ant is a person, or an I or a self. These words are synonymous. So let's take this particular object known as an I, a person, and we've all got our own name. There's Robina, there's Margaret, there's Fred, there's Lou, each one has their name. So the Buddha's telling us there's different levels in which he teaches dependent arising, and they're all arguments from the views prevailing before. He's arguing with those views. And this way of describing, he says, this ignorance causes us to believe totally and completely, 1,000,000 trillion %, to totally believe that in here somewhere, among all these bits and pieces, we know we're made of lots of parts, aren't we? We've got noses and ears and eyes and anger and jealousy and love and kindness and toenails. A person is made Things are made of many parts. If you start, you know, even just putting together a mala, it's got many parts. A computer is made of many parts. A cup is made of many parts. A flower is made of many parts. This is called everything exists in dependence upon their parts. So a person, thousands of parts. And we believe utterly, our language expresses it. We never question it. That there is in here somewhere, walking along with all the other bits, a very, very, very special bit called I, like the owner. And Buddha says, what a load of rubbish. Not true. You've made it up, babe. It's not enough to believe him. We have to prove it. I mean, of course, it sounds hilarious. What do you mean there's no I? What are you talking about? You know? So we have to do this analysis. And there's so many ways to do this analysis. So one way I like to do these days is using IKEA as an example. So you look up on the computer and you discover at IKEA a really nice thing called a Robina. You decide to buy one. She looks really nice. We know, well, you get there and you're very disappointed because you get a bloody box, don't you, with bits in it. You've got to make your own Robina, for God's sake. What a drag, you know, but it's a very good analysis. The usual analysis is the other way around because they didn't have IKEA at Buddha's time. The other analysis is you have to deconstruct their already made Robina, looking for the little intrinsic Robina. This is a nice one. You've got to build the Robina. And this is the example. I know it sounds hilarious, very comical in the beginning. You listen. So there you are. You're building up the Robina bit by bit. And this is a crucial piece to get to. We know that IKEA knows how to make things. They don't just, for a table, they don't just chuck in 5 legs and 3 screws and cross your fingers. They've already made the table, they've pulled it apart, and they know exactly how many pieces have to go in there because each piece has its function. This is a major part of understanding emptiness. Every bit of Robina, even if you had to count the number of bits that make up a person, there must be millions. Okay, so you have a very big box. And think about it, each piece will be labeled like they are in IKEA's boxes. You know, there's the left-hand toenail. There are the 37 left eye eyelashes in a little envelope labeled left eye eyelashes. Think about it. So you gradually put them all together. You're gradually building this Robina, or your own eye, your Lou, your Mary, or whoever. And you're getting nervous because you keep waiting for the very special piece, which is a special little bag, little envelope, special one with I written on it. So why do we think of a piece like that? Well, look at our language. There's many debates we have to do to argue with this misconception, Buddha says. One debate, and it sounds hilarious to us, it almost sounds silly when you say it, but I'm going to tell you, is called, if something exists, there's got to be one thing or more than one. There's no option. So listen to this now, a simple example. I will tell you something. I will say, I make a statement. I have a cup and a lid. So now how many phenomena I mentioned there is clearly 3. I'll just answer myself. One is I. That's the name of this phenomenon. It's a label for this phenomenon. Cup is another phenomenon and lid is a third. So if I made a true statement, you would look over here, you'd hear the words coming out my mouth, you'd use your intelligence and you'd check the box and go, she spoke the truth. And you would label 3 things and look at those 3 things. This is the crucial point. They are separate phenomena and they're independent, which means the lid, if it breaks, the cup won't mind and nor will Robina. The cup exists separately and independently of the other 2. That's how you can point out 3 separate things. Robina drops dead. Well, she's got to put the cup down first. The cup doesn't mind. It's still intact. It can still hold its tea. The lid can still protect the tea. And Robina, so each has got their own function and their own job, their separate function, and they're not dependent on each other. That means you can point out 3 separate phenomena. Very simple. So I'll make a slightly more subtle, definitely more subtle statement. Initially, it sounds the same. I have a nose and an ear. Again, same. How many phenomena? Ear, there it is. And it's separate from the nose because the ear can go deaf, but the nose can still breathe air. The nose can be blocked and the ear will still be fine. They're separate and independent in the simplest sense. But what about the third phenomenon? What about the eye? I said I have a nose and an ear. But we point out the ear when we point out a nose, but excuse me, where's the eye? So we assume in here there must be a piece that's called the eye that owns everything else, like a bigger piece. It's a more important piece that owns it. We say that. I have a nose. I have a foot. I have got pain. I've got anger. It's two things. So we assume there's a piece in there that's the owner of the ear, the nose, the eyelashes, the pee-pee, and the caca, and everything else. We don't question it. And Buddha says, this sounds so hilarious. Buddha says, believing in that one is the source of all suffering, of all samsara, of all the realms of existence since beginningless time. This is not the neuroscientific view of the causes of happiness or suffering, is it? This is Buddha's view. So he says he has discovered that there is no such thing, an independent, separate I. But it's not enough to believe him. He says we have to prove it. So that's why in the monasteries, the monastic university system, in all the traditions, they study all this body of knowledge. They study and debate and practice and go into retreats and meditate. And finally, one day, finally, in shamatha, in single point of concentration, one day, after countless lives of practice, the penny will drop. And you will see natively for the first time that there never has been, isn't, and never could be that intrinsic, inherent, independent, separate, real, pointable, findable little I. And Lama Zopa says the yogis, the best yogis will have such bliss to finally discover the truth. And from that second, that first moment of non-conceptual insight into emptiness, you cut the root of all suffering. You've got more work to do, but you can't go back after that. Now, if there were, this is the thing, we have to look at the argument. If there were, let's say Lou says, Robina, I hate your nose. I'll say, how dare you insult me, Lou? He'll say, no, Robina, I didn't insult you. I didn't insult your eye. I insulted your nose. Now, listen to this. My ear, let's say, when the nose gets insulted, the ear is kind of going, oh, phew, I'm glad Lou didn't insult me. Meaning that the ear's happy, it's fine, it's separate. It doesn't get touched by the hurt nose. Because why? Because they're separate. If there were this little owner in there, this little kind of piece in a little envelope with an eye shining on it, with little stars around it, which you're looking for desperately as you build the Robina, because you believe there won't be a Robina until you plug that one in, which you won't find. If there were a little piece called I that you have to plug in, without which there won't be a Robina, which we believe, it runs the show, it's like the boss bit. If there were one of those, and it were separate, which it'd have to be if it's in its own envelope, then it will be just the same as the ear. When Lou insults the nose, the eye and the ear will go, look at each other and go, wow, aren't we lucky? He didn't insult us. The eye will be relieved it didn't get insulted if there were a separate independent eye. Now, I know this sounds puzzling and ridiculous, right? This is the type of analysis we have to do. And then finally, meditation. And it sounds so abstract to think this is why we suffer. It sounds hilarious, like someone's made up some weird story, you know. This is what the Indians were discovering 3,000 years ago. We thought it was Freud. Excuse me, we're a bit rude, aren't we? You understand? Well, not quite. Maybe the Greeks, you know. Yeah, the Greeks. We like the Greeks. Are we communicating? Good. So the ignorance that believes in the intrinsic I, which gives rise to the attachment to get what the I wants, which gives rise to the anger, the panic attack when it doesn't get what it wants, which gives rise to all the other dramas, are rooted in fear. You know why? Because what they believe in doesn't exist. When you rid the mind of empty, when you rid the mind of ego grasping, when you finally realize emptiness, literally there is no fear. You are fearless, you have no attachment, you have no anger, you only have compassion, you only have wisdom, you only have love, and you only have joy and contentment. I mean, this is kind of something to look forward to. So the stronger the attachment, the stronger the anger, the stronger the ego grasping, the stronger the suffering. And this model of the mind refers to all living beings, ants, dogs, animals. So everything that exists is empty of intrinsic nature. So this is the thing. So, okay, now in that IKEA box, you won't find a separate independent piece called an I, but this is the point now. When we hear that, we go, oh, well, there's no I, it's all just not what's nothing, everything's worthless, and we chuck the baby out with the bathwater. We fall into the abyss of the great mistake, as Tsongkhapa says. And we assume that therefore there's no I. Mistake. There is an I, but not how we think. It's, as Lama Zopa puts it so nicely, if we take this framework of the two truths, when we finally realized that you won't find that little piece in there because it doesn't have a function. See, before I go further, everything, this is a really interesting point, everything that makes this cup, everything, all the pieces that come up, all the pieces that are necessary to construct a cup, we have to be absolutely, no, a table's better. The table, IKEA has worked out exactly how many legs, how much top, how many screws, exactly. And there's not a you will not get a few spare screws just in case. Because you know why? Because each piece has its own function, and each piece together functions perfectly as a table. Same with I. The nose, the eye, the ears, the eyelashes, we know we can do without a few things. You can walk around without one leg, maybe you're okay, you can manage, you know. But we know each piece has its own function. Every single piece, like your hand, you know, each finger has its own job. It's not as if the pinky will argue with the ring finger. Get away, you're doing my job. No, they each do their own job. Each piece all together works perfectly together and harmoniously to function as Robina. So Robina does exist, but not intrinsically, not independently, not separately, not pointably, not findably. You won't point it out because that's a separate independent I, but the I is dependent, arising I. And as Lama Zopa says, when you realize emptiness, it's as if there's no I. But dependent arising, there is an I. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't exist. This is Tsongkhapa's way of putting it. I think the Kargyupas and the Mapas argue with him. All got their own style.
No,
Excuse me, you're clever like John. You're even cleverer. How do you know all this? You studied all these years, these Kargyu, Nyingmapa, Sakyapa, Gelugpa, which they do for 25 years in the monasteries, like John and you both sound like a good pair. Excuse me, with respect. Have you? Thank you.
Not for 25 years.
Thank you very much. All the four schools, all the variations, all the Vibhashikas, all the Satantrikas, all the Chimatas. That's right, exactly. So be careful. Like you nodded so, just like John, you nodded so knowledgeably. I'm exposing her in public. Okay.
That's okay. No, it's okay.
Okay, so be careful. You got to hear it as if you've never heard it before. Okay. So just a taste, okay, people? So there is an I, but not from its own side. There is an I, but not independently. But we want, as soon as we say there's something, we want to point it out. But that's what you can't do. So as His Holiness says, the I isn't empty of intrinsic nature because you can't find it. You won't find it, but that's not the real premise. The I is empty of intrinsic nature because it's a dependent arising. That's why the two truths come utterly together. Until right now, with the two wrong views, we hear empty, we throw the baby out with the bathwater and we think it's nothingness. Then we hear dependent arising, we hear the somethingness. And so we have the two extreme views. The right view, the correct way to think is when we hear empty, we hear that means dependent arising. And when we hear dependent arising, we know it means emptiness. Then we're moving towards the middle way. Then we're on the right track. Then we're understanding what Nagarjuna is saying. And this is the main mistake in the world, to misconceive, to be nihilistic or to be internalistic, the two extremes. They actually refer to the same thing. And finally, when you're enlightened, these two are simultaneously cognized. It's only then you've really got the real middle way there. That's how they talk. So, to answer her question, Turkey's question, everything that exists, including negativity, positivity, negative karma, murdering, whatever exists, whatever we can posit as existing, a negative action called killing, is also a dependent arising, therefore is also empty. The I who does the action is also empty. The action of doing it is empty. And then the action is empty, and the killing is empty. Everything that exists, when we hear emptiness, we can't help but hear it negates existence. It's the exact opposite. Emptiness affirms existence. Things can only exist because they are empty. Things only exist because they're dependent arising. So everything that does exist, so negativity does exist, anger does exist, killing does exist, harming does exist. But it, like Buddhahood, is not intrinsically existing. When we hear emptiness, we hear it as saying nothingness. And therefore we say, oh, well, nothing matters anyway because it's empty. And then we think something like Buddha can't be empty. There has to be something different. That's the Christian teaching, God reified, beyond, totally, that's the dualistic view. So to remember that everything's dependent arising. So negative karma, I, the action, and the karma are negative. The I and the result and the action itself, the killing, are all empty, which tells us it's dependent arising, which tells us we can therefore purify it. If it weren't empty, you couldn't purify it. If we weren't empty, we couldn't become Buddha. So it's a question of understanding the word emptiness, which we get totally wrong. Because emptiness of intrinsic existence is a characteristic of something that exists. The Heart Sutra says that. Form is emptiness. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Buddha tells us. Emptiness is nothing other than form, and form is nothing other than emptiness. So emptiness, so form is an example of a phenomenon. Put I there, computer, it doesn't matter. So wherever there's a phenomenon, cup, toilet, eye, computer, right there, on that, right there, there is the characteristic of the absence of intrinsic form, absence of intrinsic computer. So emptiness is not something separate apart from the computer. Emptiness of intrinsic computer is a characteristic of the dependent arising computer. Absence of intrinsic Robina is a characteristic of a dependent arising Robina. And the term for the subtle dependent arising is merely labeled Robina, merely labeled computer, merely labeled cup. This is yeah. Okay. 6, 8, 7, 5. Okay, we're fine. So are there any questions, people? Yes, darling. Yes.
So the last part of that where it says there is no negative karma created, that's just on the ultimate level based on?
There's no negative karma created. There's no, just add the word intrinsic or independent. Okay. That's all. So just add that word. There's no independent karma independently created by an independent me. So just spell it out.
Even negative karma is a mere imputation of a label. At what point do you stop creating karma? When you realize emptiness?
Yes, that's right. When you finally realize emptiness, perfected it, there's no longer karma.
So is that maybe just part of the dedication of that's part of the future that we're
no, I'm lost. What? I'm lost you. I've lost you now. What's that?
So the question was those 3 lines at
the 3. It's called the 3 circles. Okay. The I is empty.
There is no, it says in emptiness, there is no I, creator of negative karma. There
That's
is
right.
no action of creating.
That's right.
There is no negative karma created.
Exactly.
So those are called the 3 circles.
That's the 3 circles, yes. Then, question?
So that was my question. Like, that it was just to have more clarification on exactly what that means.
Everything that exists, which is a dependent arising, has no intrinsic nature. Okay. Negative karma, I, action, result, whatever, if you can posit anything as existing, it is empty of intrinsic existence. That's a simple principle. That's the point. Yeah. That's right. Yes, Jack.
What means dualistic?
Dualism, I think there's different levels of dualism. The final dualism here is a dualism of the 2 true, seeing even the highest yogis, they say, who've got the realization of emptiness in their meditation, they've cut samsara, they're pretty incredible, got bodhicitta, blah, blah. In their meditation, they're completely meditating on emptiness. Then out in their daily life, they're still seeing the world. They don't believe it's got an intrinsic nature, and they're not caught up in it, but it still appears separate. It appears dualistic. So finally, when you're a Buddha, there's no subject object. There's no longer a sense of a subject object, the way they say it. There's no longer a sense of separate two truths. That's the final dualism. That's how they say it. Something like that. Okay.
It's still confusing.
I know it is confusing, Jack. That's why we've got to study it more deeply. I mean, I only know a little bit. I'm only trying to say what I do know with some confidence. We've got to study it, it's like any language. If you start talking computers, I'm lost, because I don't know the definitions of the terms. I've got to know the labels and the definitions. Then we can have a conversation, isn't it? So we've got to start here, like this conceptually, just know the labels, know the terms. And I mean, I'm not that studied, I'm not that deeply educated. But yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Okay. Anybody else? Some questions? Where? Yes, darling. Yes, Giovanna. We haven't got the mic for the poor people on the Zoom here. Sorry, please, we need it.
Yeah. If I don't exist,
And trying to say independent I, and a separate I, a little piece called I next to your two breasts in the middle somewhere here. There's an I, there's a breast, and there's a breast. Sort of think like that. There's a piece called I. Think like that. There's no thing called I.
does not exist.
A separate piece called I does not exist. Yeah.
But there is then the mind.
The mind is another thing. The mind is, I is a label put upon a combination of a body and a mind. So computers are label put upon these different parts all working together. So the parts of a person are the body and the mind, right? So the name Giovanna is the label for this particular package of body and mind. That the name Margaret is the name for this package of this body and mind. So body is one piece, mind is another, and they're the components that make up Giovanna.
And then when I die,
The mind continues.
the mind is the one that continues. That's
Yeah,
what I want to
yeah,
understand.
the mind
Would
continues.
reincarnate.
Yeah, the mind continues. The gross body stops about the time you stop breathing. That goes into the ground or gets burned. But then your subtle mind, which is also actually still connected to the very subtle wind energy, containing, your mind contains all the karmic imprints of the actions you've done. That programmed mind, very subtle, carries on and takes another birth. And then
that's not
gets-
Giovanna.
And that's a nude person. Could be, if she's naughty, it'll be like an ant or something. And if she's good, it'll be another handsome human being carrying on, practicing her spiritual path. Do you understand? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Any questions, people? Yeah. Okay. Any questions on the? Yes, darling. Patty. Yes.
I think John has a question. John,
Good,
you
go.
want to go ahead and unmute?
Yes, John. Please talk to me.
Can Robina please speak a little bit about the concept of one taste? And once again, can both the meditations on emptiness and the Yidam practice lead us to the same understanding of one taste or experience of one taste?
I mean, there's so many terms the lamas use in different traditions. Can you please give me a fuller sentence using that phrase?
So
I don't want to
once
speculate,
again,
because people think differently. Go on. Go on.
once again, I'm interested in the term one taste. What exactly is it? So
I know you
forget that-
are, but I'm asking. No, John, please, I beg you. I heard
Yeah.
you, sweetheart. I'm telling you, the lamas in different traditions, the great yogis, use many terms they might not use in all the traditions. So I need a fuller sentence using that phrase so I can hear it with some context so I can answer you accurately.
So I don't know if I can give it to you. I just came across it where, yogis at a high level, they get to a state of one taste where they don't discriminate between pleasant, unpleasant, clean or ugly.
Well, then already you're already telling me the definition of it then. Why are you asking me? John, I'm not trying to be argumentative. I've got to be clear. I'm not trying to make up things because it could be used in different contexts, this term one taste. So what you just said then indicated the meaning of that particular yogi when you said it. So say those words again, please.
So once again, the way the concept of one taste was presented to me, it's the state beyond discriminating of pure, impure, ugly, not ugly. And my question is basically, I'd like to hear
Well,
your.
if it is that you're talking about, that would have to be within the framework of emptiness, because conventionally there is ugly, there is beauty, there is good, there is bad. But within emptiness, there is no ugly, there is no good, there is no this, there is no that. So it's a question of that type of language. Within conventional reality, you must first establish, just like here talking to Turkey, I is empty of existence from its own side. Negative karma, which is a conventional truth, she just killed, that's a fact, that's a conventional truth, but that too is empty. But within emptiness, there is no I, there is no karma, there is no action. If it means that, then that is the meaning. It's discussing a realization of a person within emptiness. But that does not deny, this is the trouble, John. Many times we can, if we hear within it one taste, there's no this, no good, no bad, no nirvana, no samsara, we chuck the baby out with the bath water and hear that there is no samsara, there is no nirvana. That's nihilism.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect. One last question about this. Can a person have both? The people like us, not like yogis, not Buddhas, but people like us, can we have this glimpse of like both natures of the world, that thinks, yeah, on one hand, there is a rat in my alley, there is garbage in the alley. However, through the practice of, let's say, all appearance is green Tara, that, yeah, on one hand, yeah, there is a rat, there is dirt, there is crack pipes and urine. But on the other hand, they all are kind of like beautiful. They're all kind of
that's a different discussion. That's another concept altogether, John, and that's from the Vajrayana. In the Vajrayana, having marigpa, having ignorance, is the root cause of all suffering from here to eternity. So, that according to the different levels of practice, Sutrayana, and then we've got the Mahayana, and then within the Mahayana we have the Vajrayana. So according to emptiness, not realizing emptiness is why we all suffer. But the particular approach in Tantra, in the Vajrayana, the particular approach is because we have ego grasping, which is the term used colloquially for grasping at the intrinsic me, we see things in very mundane, gross way, and we experience very gross karma. So the practice in Vajrayana is very, very powerful. But when you take an empowerment, you commit to seeing yourself as the deity, all beings as the deity, all sound as mantra, all physical environments as a pure land. That's a specific Vajrayana practice, John.
Yep.
Are you with me?
I'm with you. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much. What else? Yeah, please.
So, Venerable Robina, the mind is a mental continuum that changes moment by moment, correct?
Yep, exactly.
So even though it changes constantly, since it's beginningless, why isn't it considered permanent?
Why isn't it? Okay, it's a question of the definition of the word permanent. It's not like that in the Buddhist philosophical view, which is why, for example, an American scholar called Alex Berzin prefers to use the term for permanent to mean abstract. It doesn't mean lasting forever. It's a very specific meaning, so I'll try and explain. Okay, so impermanent has two meanings. The subtle impermanence, and then there's a grosser level. So the impermanence of this cup is, the gross level is fairly evident. I'll keep the mic. She might want to discuss with me more. Oh, you keep it, okay. So this cup, the grosser level, we know it'll break. That's gross impermanence. But subtle impermanence is the very coming into existence of 1 millisecond of something already implies the going out of existence. So it's almost like it can be confused for emptiness, subtle impermanence. So, generally speaking, the phenomena of the world are impermanent. They change from moment to moment. They're dynamic. They're the product of cause and effect. They're made of many bits. They're produced. They've got many functions, many particular kind of qualities. All the impermanent phenomena. Without getting too abstract, there are some phenomena that do exist that aren't changing from moment to moment. That aren't impermanent. And okay, no, forget that. No, not forget that. It's okay, I'll just say it. But the word permanent here has the meaning of not changing from moment to moment, not meaning lasting forever. That's the meaning of permanent, not changing from moment to moment, not changing from moment to moment. So, for example, we are talking about understanding that this cup has a characteristic of emptiness of intrinsic cup. Can you hear that? So this cup has the characteristic of holding my tea. This cup has a characteristic of being painting with dragons on it. This cup has a characteristic of being made of clay. You with me? It also has a characteristic of possessing a characteristic called emptiness of intrinsic cup. You with me? So the emptiness of intrinsic cup is a phenomenon. Whatever the mind can cognize is that which exists. The term existent, phenomenon, object of knowledge, there are several synonyms, is a term used to refer to whatever the mind can cognize. Now, if your mind can cognize that as a cup, then that's a phenomenon. If your mind can cognize it, and we can prove it's true, there's a cup. So if your mind can cognize the emptiness of this cup, that also is a phenomenon. The emptiness of intrinsic cup is a phenomenon. It's an abstract phenomenon. That's the one that is not impermanent. It's just you have to understand how they talk about it. It's abstract. It's like abstract is the best way to put it. You can't touch it or taste it or feel it or see it, but it's the absence of inherent existence on this cup is counteracting a view that we've got in the mind that we made up. So seeing the absence of that absence is a real phenomenon that does exist, but it's an abstract phenomenon. It's not an impermanent phenomenon. That's how they even describe why they describe things in terms of permanent and impermanent. It's not the way we talk, in other words. So permanent, just to answer your question, means not changing from moment to moment. So the mind is impermanent. It lasts forever, but it's changing from moment to moment. It's beginningless and endless, but it's changing from moment to moment. It doesn't have this abstract characteristic.
Okay, thank you. I will definitely have to replay this many times. And I do read Gerson.
Okay, good. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, no, good. Okay, now, to understand what I mean here, okay, the simple answer to your question without confusing it is that permanent doesn't mean long lasting. Permanent means not changing from moment to moment, which is why Berson's very sensible in calling it abstract, because it completely throws us unless we know the definition. Do you understand? So as for how some phenomena can have that characteristic, we just have to, it's the Buddhist view, we have to learn it, you know? Okay. So it's interesting discussion. Let's just talk about it for a second. Okay. Okay. So this word emptiness, we really get confused because we think it means nothing. This is another discussion, but it's helping us understand your point. So I always use these examples. We use this in daily language. So I'll pick up my cup to drink my tea, right? Or my hot water. And I'll go, oh, my cup's empty. We say that, don't we? So what does it mean? What does it mean?
There's no tea in
That's right, precisely. And why would I say it? This is the crucial point now. Why would I say that?
Because you're cognizing it?
No, more than that. Why am I saying it? It's a good point. What came before? I was expecting tea, wasn't I?
Yes.
That's the point now. This is interesting. If you walk into the shop where they sell cups, you with me? You don't go, oh, there's no tea in there. Why would you not say that? Keep your mask off, or I can hear you, please.
They're not expecting it.
Thank you. It's a really good point. So now listen to this. You think it's $5,000 in your bank. You want to come on pilgrimage with me, and you determine it's there. You know it's there. You saved it, and you open up your bank account, and you go, "Oh my God, where's my $5,000?" Okay, that's possible, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you're going to a party and you're looking, I always think of going to a hotel and there's an event room, and you're looking for this party full of people, and you open the room. Oh, the room's empty of people. So the only person who would notice the no tea is a person who expects tea. The only person who will get a shock when they see lack of $5,000 is the person who expected $5,000. The only person who noticed, the room's empty is the person who expected. You understand?
Yeah.
You understand? The only person who would get a shock in your subtle meditation when you go, there is no independent I. There never has been and never could be. The only person who notices that is a person who has believed, like all of us, since beginning this time, in an intrinsic person. So the absence of water is completely conceptual, isn't it? You can't taste it, touch it, smell it, see it. It's completely contingent upon a previous thought of believing it was there. You have the misconception there was tea there. You have had since beginningless time the misconception that there has been a real findable I in here. So discovering the absence of that one is the most profound shock, but it's a blissful shock. So in other words, the only person who's going to see the absence of an I is the person who's believed in an I, and that's the whole universe. So the absence of an I, you can't taste it, touch it, or smell it, but it's a very real cognition, a very real thing that exists. That absence of that I is what you realize. So that type of phenomenon, the absence of something, is not made of parts. No, it has made of parts. It's not impermanent. It's not caused. It's just how they talk. It's a particular way of talking. But the real answer is what I said before. But that's just to give you an extra bit of something to think about. That kind of phenomenon. In your mind right now, let's say there's no anger. You understand that?
Yeah.
Well, then we can say in your mind right now, there does exist the phenomenon called the absence of anger. We can say it like that. It's very roundabout, but it's very meaningful. You with me? That's a real phenomenon.
Well, I was with you when we were talking about mind, but
Mind what? What do you mean?
mind is not what we think of as a self-existent I, right? Mind is something.
Mind's got nothing to do with your I. Mind
Right,
is
so
the,
that's why
what's your,
now I'm a little bit lost.
well, I'm a little bit lost with your question, so ask it again. Can you please take your mask off so I can hear you? Forgive me for shouting at everybody.
Okay.
You're farther enough away, you're not going to breathe on anybody. So just sort of spit on yourself. It's all right. Come on. Now tell me what you're saying.
Okay. I think I'd rather just listen to this again.
No, darling, say the questions. Come on, it's good.
Well,
What you saying?
I wasn't associating the
Can you speak
mind.
closer to the mic, please?
I wasn't associating the mind with the I.
But excuse me, just a minute. Your question was, why isn't the mind called permanent if it lasts forever? That was your question. There's no discussion about the I. So why has suddenly the I got something to do with the price of fish?
Because I thought that's what you were just talking about. Emptiness and the lack of an inherent I. Isn't that what you were
I was
just-
giving an example of a phenomenon that doesn't change from moment to moment,
Oh, okay.
called the emptiness of something.
Okay.
That was all.
Okay.
That was all. I was giving you an example of a type of a phenomenon that's not changing from moment to moment, which is abstract, or which is what the Buddhists call permanent. That was the point of that. Nothing to do with the mind.
Okay. Okay.
But your mind happens to be the one that realizes it. That's all.
Okay.
Do you see my point?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, darling. Okay, who else? Any questions, people? I'm probably confused you more. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to.
But wouldn't that to some degree,
Hey, start again, darling.
wouldn't
A bit
that,
closer.
that observation, would it not depend to some degree on the depth of the analysis, on the extent to which you're examining it? So if we really look at that cup, right, it's made up of millions and millions of molecules, and even more subtle than that, right? I mean,
We want.
and even more subtle than that, like the tiniest particles, right?
Yeah.
The quantum level.
That's just that's still the physical components of it. So the conclusion from that,
Well, it doesn't mean that it's still ever changing there, although it may represent some permanence. It is not, right? So
it's what?
so that it may represent some permanence.
It may represent what?
We can look at it as permanent to some degree.
Oh, I see. We're discussing permanence here. Okay, I see what you're saying.
Right? Permanence of the impermanent.
Your cup is impermanent. It's changing from moment to moment. That's exactly right.
Right.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's exactly right. No, I agree. Exactly right. I agree. Yes, exactly. Who else? People? Questions?
And so my point there, though, is that
Oh.
is that also true then of the mind, right? So although the mind continues, and it could be considered in that sense permanent, in quotes, not eternal.
So your point is right.
It's always
Using
changing.
that's right.
It's
Using the term that we use for permanent, the definition meaning lasting forever, that is what the mind is, but it's not the meaning of permanent from the Buddhist philosophical view. That's all I was trying to get clear. But yes, absolutely. Yes. But it's impermanent, changing from moment to moment, but it's endless and beginningless. You understand?
Okay.
Whereas, for example, the emptiness of that cup, emptiness of the inherent existence of that cup is a phenomenon, and it's an abstract phenomenon, and that's what permanent means. So that could last just for 5 minutes. When the cup, as long as the cup is existing, there is the emptiness of the cup there. As soon as the cup breaks, the emptiness of the cup is gone. So the whole, I'm trying to talk here that an example of a permanent phenomenon, an example of an abstract phenomenon, using Berzin's term, is the emptiness of intrinsic existence, or the absence of tea in this cup, or the absence of anger in your mind. The phenomenon called, quote unquote, the absence of anger. That is a phenomenon that does exist in your mind. Once you get that negating way of talking, then you can get your head around the concept of emptiness. Can you hear that concept? Can you hear it?
Yes.
That there is a phenomenon called, quote unquote, the absence of anger in your mind right this second. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Would you agree if there's no tea in this cup? Would you agree that there is a phenomenon called the absence of tea in the cup? It's not meant to be clever. It's getting us used to the way of using the term of emptiness. That's all.
Okay. Thank you.
Because what the yogi in meditation, in shamatha, finally, after much analysis and hard work for many lifetimes, finally one day sees the truth that in fact has always existed there. That there never has been, isn't, and never could be an intrinsic I. They've just realized emptiness, quote unquote. And that phenomenon called the emptiness of intrinsic I is a phenomenon that does exist, and it happens to be abstract, or what they would call permanent, meaning uncaused. It's just too abstract to even think about it, so I'll shut up talking about it. Don't worry about it. Okay, don't worry about it. But it has meaning when we get it. You understand? I'm sorry to rave on. I'm not trying to confuse you all. Maybe we'll talk about the weather or something. Who else has got a question? So just to conclude then, okay. I mean, I didn't even talk about Tara at all, but never mind. I was going to do a meditation. I didn't. Never mind. Okay, it's all right. So the understanding of emptiness is the key factor that helps you become Tara. Because if you're sitting there, oh, I'm Robina and I'm fat and I'm ugly and I'm old and I'm Australian and I'm mean and you're not going to become Tara in 40 trillion years, I promise. When you loosen the grip of that identity of me, fat, ugly, boring, me set in stone, then you start to identify with your goodness. And that is what transforms into the deity. So it's crucial to understand emptiness. Your becoming Tara is dependent upon realizing emptiness of you. That's what I want to finish with. Okay, people. See you tomorrow. Yes, hopefully, unless we're dead or exhausted. Thank you, people. Good night, everybody. I'm sorry. I hope I didn't try. We should cancel that permanent business. It just got confusing. But never mind, it's all gone. And maybe you'll think about it and it'll make sense one day. When you read Hopkins, you go, oh, I remember Robina said that 2.5 years ago. Now I get it. Okay. Jang Chub Semcho, Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ke Guchig, Ke Panyam Pa Me Pa Yang Gong Ne Gondu Pabashog, Gewa Di Nudu Dag, Lama Sangye Drub Yone, Drawa Chikyang Malupa, Dei Sala Gopashog. That's enough. We'll finish tomorrow. Okay, petals. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Venerable
Thank you,
Robina.
darling. Thank you, sweetheart. Good night.
Say thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Wonderful teachings. We love you.
Thank you.